Hi everybody and happy February. This month's kindness theme is spreading love. With Valentine's Day just around the corner, it's a nice way for us to reach out to others and let them know that we care. I'm going to read this book, Somebody Loves You, Mr. Hatch, pictures by Paul Yalowitz, and the story, I can't read who that's by, is by Eileen Spinelli. Mr. Hatch was tall and thin, and he didn't smile. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, he would leave his brick house and walk 8 blocks to the shoelace factory where he worked. At lunchtime, he would sit alone in a corner, eat his cheese and mustard sandwich, and drink a cup of coffee. Sometimes he brought a prune for dessert. I don't like prunes, do you? After work, he would make 2 stops. At the newspaper stand to get the paper, and at the grocery store to buy a fresh turkey wing for his supper. After supper, he read the paper, took a shower, and went to bed early. He keeps to himself. That is what everyone said about Mr. Hatch. He was sort of quiet and to himself, and that's okay. One Saturday, when Mr. Hatch stepped onto the porch with his dustpan and broom, he got a surprise. A package wrapped in brown paper. He had never spoken to the postman before. "Thank you, Mr. Goober," he said. Mr. Goober smiled. "You're welcome. I also enjoy delivering packages." Mr. Hatch tore the brown paper off. Inside was a white box, which he opened to find another box. This one was heart-shaped, all satiny red with a pink bow on top, and it was filled with candy. Something fluttered to the porch floor. It was a little white card. He picked it up. It said, "Somebody loves you." Only then did he remember that this was Valentine's Day. It's a lot of chocolates in that box. I've gotten boxes of chocolates, but not with that many of them. Mr. Hatch wondered and wondered, now who would send this to me? He was all alone. He had no friends, and yet someone had sent him a Valentine. Who? He put the box on the coffee table and tried to do some dusting, but every time he left the room, he had to keep peeking to see if that box was still there. He dusted, and the dust cloth seemed to whisper, "Somebody loves you. Somebody loves you." At last, he flung the dust cloth away and exclaimed, "Why, I've got a secret admirer!" And then he did something he had never done before. He laughed. He laughed and danced and clapped his hands, and then he took a piece of candy from the box and he ate it. It's so nice to feel loved. So nice to know that people are thinking about you. Mr. Hatch changed his shirt and found some old aftershave in the bottom drawer. He splashed it on his face. He picked out a yellow tie with blue polka dots and he put it on. And he went for a walk. Maybe he thought, I will meet the person who sent me candy. Of course, no one had ever seen Mr. Hatch wearing a tie or smelling aftershave or smiling. So he got a lot of attention. Mrs. Weed tripped over her dog. Mr. Dunwoody nearly fell off his ladder, and little Tina Finn spilled all the toys out of her wagon. Mr. Hatch waved hello to all of them. On Monday, he was back to work. At lunchtime, Mr. Hatch sat in the middle of the cafeteria. He spoke to everyone and passed out chocolates from his heart box. On the way home, as usual, he stopped at the newsstand. Mr. Smith handed him the usual paper. "I think I'll have a pack of mints," said Mr. Hatch. Not as usual. Mr. Smith was shocked. "Was that you speaking, Mr. Hatch?" "Indeed it was," said Mr. Hatch. "I said I would also like a pack of mints. And if you don't mind saying so, Mr. Smith, you don't look very well today." Mr. Smith recovered from his shock to reply, "You're right. I don't feel very well. I have a cold. I was supposed to go to the doctor's this afternoon, but the stand has been so busy, I haven't had the time." Mr. Hatch smiled. "Why, I'd be happy to watch the stand for you while you go." Mr. Smith could hardly believe his ears. "You would?" And so Mr. Hatch ran the newspaper for an hour. He wondered if any of the women who stopped to buy the paper or a magazine or a candy bar had sent him the mysterious Valentine. When Mr. Smith returned, Mr. Hatch made his usual stop at the grocery store. "I'm a little tired of turkey wings," he told Mr. Todd. "I think I'll have a nice fresh slice of ham." Mr. Todd weighed the meat and wrapped it. "You look worried," said Mr. Hatch. "I am," said Mr. Todd. "My little girl is late. She hasn't come home from school yet, and I can't leave the store to go look for her until my wife arrives." "Goodness, why didn't you say so?" said Mr. Hatch. "I will go look for her." And so he walked to school and found little Melanie Todd by the swings and brought her home. Thank you, said the grocer. "Any time," said Mr. Hatch. After supper, Mr. Hatch did not bother to read the paper. He decided to bake brownies instead. It would be nice to have some brownies to share the next day with the people at the shoelace factory. As he baked, the warm chocolate smell of brownies floated through the neighborhood, and children gathered round Mr. Hatch's house, sniffing the air. "Well, I suppose the factory can wait," said Mr. Hatch as he looked out the window, and he brought out 2 platefuls. "Now, what are brownies without lemonade?" he said, and he stirred up a nice cold pitcher. When the parents came to gather their children, they had some brownies too. It turned out to be a picnic in Mr. Hatch's backyard. He dusted off an old harmonica and played songs he remembered from his boyhood. Everyone danced. That's a big party. Not very safe right now in COVID times. "I don't suppose you still have it," said Mr. Goober sadly. "As a matter of fact," said Mr. Hatch, "the candy is all gone. I still have the box. Why would you ask?" The postman took a deep breath. "I'm afraid I delivered it to the wrong address. It was supposed to go to another house." Mr. Hatch recalled tearing off the brown paper. It had never occurred to him to look at the address. He fetched the heart-shaped box and the pink bow and gave them to the postman. "I do hope your supervisor won't be too angry with you now." The postman was heading down to the sidewalk when Mr. Hatch called from his porch, "Mr. Goober, I forgot something." And he gave the postman the little white card, the one that says "Somebody loves you." Alone in his living room, Mr. Hatch sighed. Nobody loved me after all. Then he read the paper, took the shower, and went to bed early. The next morning at 6:30 sharp, Mr. Hatch left his brick house, walked 8 blocks to the shoelace factory. At lunchtime, he sat in the corner by himself, ate his cheese and mustard sandwich, and drank a cup of coffee. Look how sad he was. After work, he stopped at the newsstand for his paper, but he didn't speak to Mr. Smith. And he ordered his turkey wing from Mr. Todd. He didn't smile. Nor did he pat little Melanie Todd on the head, or bake brownies, or have picnics, or parties, or play his old harmonica anymore. Everyone whispered, "What's wrong with Mr. Hatch?" Mr. Goober, the postman, told them. "We love Mr. Hatch," insisted Mr. and Mrs. Dunwoody. "He gave us flowers for our garden. He helped to mend our back fence," Mrs. Weed nodded. "I love him too. He saved his bones for my dog Ruffy." Ruffy barked. She loved Mr. Hatch too. Mr. Smith told everyone how Mr. Hatch had watched his newsstand so he could visit the doctor. And Mr. Todd told everyone how Mr. Hatch had found his little girl. All the children in the neighborhood remembered Mr. Hatch's wonderful brownies and lemonade, and most of all, his laughter. "Oh, poor Mr. Hatch," they said. "What can we do?" And Mr. Goober said, "I have an idea." On Saturday morning, Mr. Hatch woke to a bright and sunny day. He put on his old overalls and went out to the porch with his dustpan and broom. He couldn't believe his eyes. All over the porch were red and white hearts and pink bows. There were boxes of candy on the chairs and yellow streamers flowing from the ceiling. And sticking out of his mailbox was a shining silver harmonica. The front yard was filled with people, happy, smiling people. They were holding up a huge sign with hand-painted letters, and it said, "Everybody loves Mr. Hatch." Mr. Hatch dabbed at a tear with his handkerchief. "I do believe," he said, "somebody loves me after all." And then he smiled, and then he laughed, and then he'd hurried down to be with his friends. I love that story. It's so nice to feel loved by others, and it's so nice to let other people know that they are loved by you. I can't wait to hear all the ways that you reach out and let people know that you love them this month. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye.